Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's session on the April 2026 Umbrella Report Company Reforms. Here at the Shropshire Chamber, our mission is about providing added value services to support local businesses, whether they are members or non-members, and that's exactly what this session is all about. So many businesses use contractors, temporary workers, or agencies without realising that you may have umbrella companies in your actual supply chain. So with significant legislative changes just weeks away now, we've brought in specialists who can help you understand what those changes will be. So whether it affects your business, what practical steps you need to take, that will all be covered this morning. So I'm delighted to introduce Jools from RedWizard and Jack from Freeflexer, who will be your experts today and walking us through everything you need to know. So I'll now hand over to Jools.
Thanks, Kelly. Thank you. I think just as a little note on housekeeping, if people have questions, please just signal me in some way, or you're welcome to raise your digital hand in Zoom, or if you want to stick a question in the chat or comments, then we'll pick those up as they come in. But given the size of the group, I think let's keep it fairly informal. I like to start webinars with a little bit of context. I think it's always useful to think about why we're here and why now. And I would forgive people for thinking umbrella reform feels like quite a specific piece of legislation, maybe quite a specific challenge that needs solving. To me, it's actually a little bit broader. I see this as a small piece of a much bigger picture. There's a sort of rejuvenation of regulation and legislation in the UK workforce at the moment. And I think it's designed to sort of catch up with the shift we've seen in how work is delivered, particularly post-COVID. What we're seeing is more and more organisations using flexible or extended workers to fulfil their work and boost innovation and so on. And with that change, obviously comes updates from the government, because they have to make sure that, crucially, work is still regulated in a sort of fair and transparent way. And crucially, there isn't a new tax hole. They want to make sure that their arms are still wrapped around this. So what we're seeing, I think, is the UK government trying to wrap their arms around the sort of fast evolving way that work is being delivered in the UK. And you can see evidence of this in things like the Fair Work Agency, who are a new agency that have been commissioned to sort of really regulate and ensure compliance around some of this stuff. We've got the Employment Rights Act, which is the sort of biggest shake-up in how employment gets done in the UK for probably a generation. And then in the background, we've got things like HMRC's sort of tooling up of additional 5,000 agents. They're digitalising their services. Anyone with family members or sort of personally who runs a limited company or is a sole trader will know that process is well underway. And to me, all of those elements compiled into one place point to one thing, and that's the government saying we want better control and visibility of what's happening in businesses, but also across the supply chain. And if I was running a large business with lots of employees, I'd be thinking the government's been quite clear here that they want to share accountability across that supply chain. And this is sort of one of those signals. So it might feel specific. I think umbrella reform sounds specific. It's actually really far reaching. The impacts will be felt across most industries and sectors. But it's the start. It's not the finish. There's lots more to come on this stuff, and it will impact workforces in perpetuity. I think there's more to come. So with that in mind, like, that's the context, that's the scene. It's not a negative thing, right? This is just change, and I'm a firm believer that with every change, there's huge opportunities for businesses. So we'll dive into this. This is a session that's designed to give you like practical insight, not just a sort of lecture on tax legislation. That's not the objective at all. Can we leave you in a better place than where we found you? That's the objective, all right? So I will share my screen. Oh, I should say, if you're interested in things like Fair Work Agency and the Employment Rights Act, the Shropshire Chamber of Commerce do an excellent event called the HR in Focus Forum, and I highly recommend it, not just because I'm speaking at one soon, but because I do think they take very seriously their obligation to get in front of local businesses. That's my plug for you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Right, I'll share my screen and we can jump into the very sexy subject of umbrella reform. Jools, we've sort of said hello, but do you mind introducing yourself properly?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's good to do an opening poll just to get a feel from what people already know about umbrella reform already. But Yeah, hello, I'm Jools, founder of RedWizard Consulting, a Shropshire-based business for the last 8 years. We are just entering our 13th year. Background in project management openly and helping businesses transform from one state to another. I fell into external workforce management, as many people did, about 12 years ago, and have remained there ever since, just because it's a changing industry, a transforming industry, and I'm very excited to be working with businesses to help them adapt right to the new world of work, but really making it great for workers and great for business as well. I've worked a lot with enterprise level folks. They have pretty much every complexity, I'd say, under the sun in terms of external workforce engagement, lots of different workforce types, lots of different worker types coming into that. And as legislation changes, particularly across the EMEA region, where we're seeing a large amount of change there, really we're at the heart of that and helping businesses adapt to what that looks like. Very excited to be presenting today and to talking to you more about umbrella form and the wider landscape this year, but really not so much focused on creating fear, but actually just thinking it more as an opportunity to get businesses to get their feet under them, get on the right side of compliance, but then really be able to optimize how they leverage external workers into the future.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm Jack, I'm a flexible workforce specialist. I've spent most of my career at that sort of intersection between technology and people. I worked in the tech sector for the last decade, helping a little startup become a bit of a global player in freelancer management. Spent a lot of time at the coalface with talent acquisition, HR, people directors, those types of people in large complex organizations. I think Jools will probably agree with this. Whilst the complexities and maturity of these businesses varies enormously, the challenges are almost ubiquitous, and we see like really similar patterns everywhere. So we both come at this from the perspective of this isn't anyone's fault, but there is a good opportunity here. I should say I'm Yorkshire based. Jools and I partnered on this, so I'm a fan of Shropshire, but I live in North Yorkshire, so I'm a implant today. I think if we move on to just a little bit of surface stuff around what an umbrella company actually is, it might be useful.
Just let me do the quick poll.
Oh, poll.
Get a temperature test. I'm just going to launch it, guys, now. Hopefully that'll pop up on your screen.
I mean, I feel for Zoe on this app already.
Did it!
Hey!
Oh, don't want him to be an emotional wreck by the end of it. We're going to do exactly the same poll at the end, guys. We're just testing out whether or not the information that we're sharing is the right information to help you guys. So there we go.
Fantastic.
All right, everyone voted.
I'm going to see if I can spot the emotional wrecks as we go. So very briefly, in our top level, an umbrella company is an employment business. If you're a temporary worker in the UK, you've really got three avenues of how you sort of get paid and pay your taxes. One is you can set up a limited company. Let me tell you, I do not recommend it. Number two is become a sole trader. You find this really commonly in like trades. So it's a really simple model to pay your taxes and invoice. But a really popular model in the UK is that sort of employee experience, and that's where the umbrella company comes in. An independent worker can pay an umbrella company to become their employer, and for the money that they give that umbrella, what they get is their tax deducted at source, all the tax report to HMRC, they get a pay slip, and they get that sort of weekly or monthly pay in their bank account net of any taxes owed. So it's a really simple way of giving a worker that employee experience. And it's a really simple way of organisations engaging workers without having to set up loads of bespoke services. They're kind of unique to the UK, and up until now, they've been a fantastic solution, if somewhat a little bit of a leaky bucket when it comes to compliance and tax, but we'll get onto that. I think it's useful to understand a little bit of context around how they became the status quo, because, as I say, not every country has these. And it's easy to see why they're so popular, though. From a sort of umbrella perspective, obviously they like existing because they make revenue, and they make their revenue by workers paying them to be to sort of go underneath that umbrella. They're paying to be an employee of that organisation. They're heavily linked to the recruitment and staffing industry. If you think about it from a recruitment and staffing agency perspective, if you have, let's say, 100 to 200 people being deployed to your clients, that's quite a lot of financial exposure. If an invoice doesn't get paid for any reason, then all of a sudden you owe 200 people's salaries, and that's quite a financial risk. It's also a big operational problem. Staffing agencies aren't inherently automatically good at running complex payrolls, so they would engage umbrellas almost as partners to help sort of business flow through them. Contractors love them because it's a path of least resistance, as I just described. You pay a small fee, maybe 20 to 50 pounds a week. And for that, you get your tax code, you get your taxes paid, you get your salary, and you feel like an employee. Some of them even wrap up things like pension contributions, sick day, holiday pay into your assignment fee. So they're a real easy fix. And then hiring businesses love them. So end clients love them because they mop up all of that employment risk. And it means that if anything happens during that contract, they're not your employee. They're just delivering services to you, which is a real get out of jail free card. And I've seen it used several times in my career, but it sort of works for everyone. The analogy I use is the umbrellas are basically like this magic sponge that soaks up all of this liability risk around employment, taxes, finance, everything really. It was a real brilliant solution for a very long time. Jools touched on IR35 earlier, and I should say that lots of organisations, when IR35 came into the private sector and using limited company freelancers and contractors became more risky, lots of businesses pushed them onto umbrellas. And we'll sort of get to the bottom of why that maybe wasn't the best idea in a second. I mean, they weren't to know, but essentially some of that security is being eroded. Does that make sense around what they do and where their place in the market is? Some nodding. Good. All right. So the big change, as I say, like if we use that context I've given you, right, they are this amazing organization that soaks up all the risk in your supply chain. If there's tax liability, it's stopped with the umbrella. If there's employment liability, it's stopped with the umbrella. Everyone's happy, right? The big change is really a liability shift. HMRC is opening the can of worms, and they're saying that liability and obligations are now going to be shared throughout the supply chain, and you just have to understand as a hiring business or as a staffing or recruitment agency whether or not you're going to be the relevant party in that risk. So what was once a neat little package all tied up in a bow is now a big sprawling mess where you have to get to the bottom of where the liability sits. So from the 6th of April, they'll introduce powers to recover PAYE, national insurance, income tax from whoever is in that supply chain if they're the relevant party. The driving force behind this has been some major compliance breaches. I think you might be forgiven for thinking this would be sort of small tin pot umbrellas that have made a couple of mistakes and it's costing the government a few million quid. The biggest exposure so far has been £177 million from one umbrella from failing to pay employers' NICs. So what we're actually talking about is huge enterprise organisations dealing with millions and millions of pounds failing to either pay or report the right amount of tax. So you can see whether that's pricked the government's interest. HMRC expects to recover 2.5 billion, or recover is probably not a fair word. They're expected to generate 2.5 billion in additional tax revenue over the next 5 years from this reform, just by making everyone in that supply chain more accountable. They've seen it work with IR35. They've seen that if you make the hiring business more accountable, then people pay attention because no one wants to be audited or investigated. We'll talk a little bit around specific definitions in a sec. Do you have anything to add there, Jools, or is that fairly comprehensive?
No, it's pretty comprehensive. I mean, I think the key takeaway there is the fact that this isn't a theoretical risk, right, that the government has employed a lot more inspectors, right? This is almost like a funded recovery program that we're seeing launch up here, which is exactly what we had on IR35, by the way. But yeah, going back to the broader landscape, the direction of travel is clear here. More transparency, more control, and I didn't know, or I thought I'd outsource this risk. We won't protect you, I'm afraid. But we will get into the nuances of what this means for end clients who are using external workers, because that has shifted a little bit from where the government first positioned this and when the finance bill was actually released. So I think getting into that detail will be important.
Yeah, Yeah, agreed. I think that key detail about the HMRC agents, I think, is a really understated movement. I think one of their learnings from IR35 was that people felt like until I start seeing loads of prosecutions, I'm not going to worry about it. And what HMRC have done is said, okay. And what they're doing now is really ramping up those prosecutions. You'll see many more tribunals flowing through the courts as this stuff escalates. But the message couldn't be any clearer, I don't think, around their intention here. This is strict liability, day one, and that thing about reasonable care doesn't apply here. This is very, very strict. The key detail. Do you want to give this one a crack, Jules, or am I doing this?
Yeah, no, I can talk to this. Really, I think we've already covered the fact that the movement here from HMRC, but the shift that's happened in the finance bill is that if there is an agency between the end client and the umbrella, that they will go after the agency first. And that is quite a shift. So that means that the liability for tax, that risk is reduced for end clients who are using recruitment agencies to go out to market and to find those people. Of course, we still have large swathes of businesses who are engaging with the market directly as well. And for those folks, they still have that tax liability as well. Also important to probably mention the relationship between the agency and the umbrella also matters. So if they have a commercial relationship or they have a shared board or the umbrella is based offshore, where obviously tax can't be recouped by HMRC, then the end client will come back into the frame there for that tax liability. But probably the most important thing to take away as an end client, even if you are using an agency there, is that yes, your liability for that tax vastly reduced, but there are so many other risks here which we need to be thinking about. And I think a few we've detailed on the slide there. So operational risk, right? When we think about how people utilize external labor, a lot of project work is done through contractors, right? Because that's flexible resourcing that we bring in to our businesses. When we have a need arrive, that might be a capability issue where we're bringing skills and that we don't have, or it might be a capacity issue, right, where we might have seasonal demands. We see it a lot in manufacturing, these types of businesses, in construction, particularly if I think about the businesses here in Shropshire, in engineering, we see it a lot as well, hospitality, healthcare. These folks use a lot of external workers to be able to manage seasonal demand or flexible demand. And those types of businesses are at high risk here just for the sheer volumes and the fluidity of those types of hiring processes. But if we think about the operational risk, I mean, I've worked on projects for probably 30 years now. I'm not showing my age too much, but the cost to an end business of having a project falter mid-flow because suddenly the agency has disappeared because they can't pay the liability. Maybe the umbrella's gone down, right, and your talent pipeline stops there. Workers don't get paid. That's how serious it becomes. From a governance risk perspective, we hear a lot of people say, hey, I don't have to worry about this. I've outsourced it. I've got a contract, with my agency. They take liability here. Well, it's the agency's job to maintain compliance, but it's your job to make sure they're doing a good job of maintaining compliance. So the end client is still responsible for the governance, right? The oversight of those relationships and to make sure those agencies and umbrellas are performing as they should. And what we mean by the joint and several liability here is that risk doesn't get duplicated down the line, it gets shared basically across that supply chain. Reputational risk we've also covered here. Sometimes that's actually the biggest impact is reputational risk. Workers don't get paid. People will know about it. People are rife on social media today with these types of things. Word travels fast. Contractors are extremely connected to one another because they're always looking for their next gig, right? So they always stay very well networked. So reputational risk is definitely something which businesses need to be thinking about.
Brilliant, thank you. I think we're already seeing operational risk have a massive impact. Lots of businesses are approaching this by reducing the number of suppliers, but that puts more pressure on the suppliers that you do select. One of the things we'll talk about a little bit is around understanding like the solvency of some of your suppliers, because what we're seeing is organizations disappearing overnight because of these pressures. So we've already seen a couple of umbrellas who are sort of accredited by some of the big brand accreditation bodies in the market disappear overnight owing sort of £500,000 in unpaid tax. So if those businesses disappear, obviously there's a liability there, but think about what that does operationally to you if overnight 10 to 20% of your workforce can't come into work because they're not being paid the next day. We're already seeing that impact. I'll skate through the definitions. This is even for me pretty difficult to make glamorous. I think what you'll see in the market is joint and several liability is a phrase that comes up time and time again. Interestingly to me, the most important word in that is and. It's not or, it's and. And what they're saying is if someone in your supply chain fails either through malpractice or incompetence, you can also be liable, and they can come after anyone that they choose. In my opinion, HMRC tend to choose who's got the most money and who's the easiest target. And in my book, that tends to be the hiring business. Obviously, only if they're the relevant party, which brings us on to the next step. Jools has really clearly defined, I think, what a relevant party is. Essentially, there'll always be two relevant parties in this. It will either be, it's always the umbrella, it will either be a staffing agency or the end client. There's a few variables in there, but what we're expecting to see is a mix of businesses being held accountable for this. Strict liability.
We have a question which popped up.
Fantastic. Hold on, let me open it. How can a business protect itself from supply chain risks? Excellent, Orion. I think the first big problem here is not understanding where these umbrellas sit in your supply chain. If you have a staffing agency in your supply chain, underneath it might be 5, 6, 7, maybe a dozen umbrellas that all feed into that staffing agency. So this mushrooms out really quickly, which is why, like Jools and I will get onto the sort of solves here in a little bit, but really this is an exercise in getting your ducks in a row. It's about control and visibility. So we'll talk about sort of how to do that in a sec, but I think the big thing for people to start thinking about is maybe I can see like one layer down in my supply chain. Maybe that looks like a staffing agency, or it might look like a business that supplies workers, but what's underneath them? And that's where the sort of key detail is of this reform. So just going back quickly to strict liability, with IR35, there's this sort of clause in the legislation around reasonable care. And if you could demonstrate that you'd done the due care and attention, you had a new policy, maybe you had a vendor that was doing classifications for you, you could hold up all of your SDSs and say, look, we've got a good, robust process in here. Hey, sometimes we make mistakes. Then that was sort of seen as good enough. That's not the case here. If the liability exists, then it's yours. And HMRC won't negotiate. They've said very firmly, if we think there's a tax debt and you're the relevant party, then there's no appeal process here. It's not about having process. And that's why strict liability means we have to move into a process really, which is called like rolling auditing, which is understanding almost at every moment what's going on in your business, which comes back to that point I was making for you, Orion, around visibility. Right. I'll nobble this and then I'll have a break, Jools. So where exposure usually sits, Jools and I have been talking to organisations for the last 6 months already on this stuff. But as I said at the start of this, the trends we see in organisations tend to be fairly similar, albeit with slightly different challenges and nuances all over the place. Most organisations have multiple umbrellas in their supply chain that sit underneath multiple agencies. So I've worked with businesses before that have got dozens of recruitment and staffing agencies that supply workers to them. And underneath each of those might be another dozen. So you can see how quickly that problem will grow. The visibility of that stuff tends to be really, really poor. Supply chains, no one really sits down and says, right, today I'm going to define my supply chain and do that work really diligently and set up like a really robust operating model. What tends to happen is that they organically grow over time as needs arise and needs fade away. So the visibility of that stuff tends to be quite poor because there's no like centralization, there's no governance, there's no ownership. All of those problems exist. On known payroll models, lots of businesses will have people in the business and they know they're doing the work, but they don't necessarily know how they're paying tax, or they don't know how they're set up to pay tax. In the past, I think those like operating models that independent workers used to have were sort of empty vessels, but now it's really, really important for organizations to know exactly how everyone's set up, because that sort of classification and control element is key to avoiding investigation. Outdated agreements is really common as well. People tend to not think too deeply about signing up an agreement. It's whatever gets the supplier in, right? Often it'll be Friday night and they just need that worker in on Monday, so they'll just sign whatever. And I've been in several organizations where as soon as you start trying to find out where all these commercial agreements sit, it'll be someone's desk drawer, Joanne's filing cabinet at home. It will be on an Excel spreadsheet. It'll be in an inbox. Like, those agreements need consolidation, and businesses tend not to have a terrific grip around them. And then outdated is a really important phrase here as well, because people are updating their commercials to have things like audit rights and indemnification in them. So if you signed up something in 2016, over the last 10 years, the world has changed, and it has changed very severely. So those agreements will be completely out of date. And then local workarounds. My favorite is the gap between what's written on paper and what's the reality in your business. And every business I've ever been into, the gap is enormous between what you think is happening or what leadership thinks is happening and what the boots on the ground worker is doing just to get through the day and get their tasks cleared. That gap tends to be absolutely huge. And I think this process is also about sort of shining a light on that and seeing if you can narrow it down. It's not saying either is right or wrong. It's about agreeing what the actual reality is, because there's no point having a warped reality of what's going on in your business if HMRC investigates and finds out it's actually quite a different reality. So those are where exposure points usually sit, and those are like entry points for Jools and I when we talk to organisations. Again, not the blame game. This is almost ubiquitous, I'd say, right, Jools, across most businesses to varying degrees. And it's just the nature of how businesses evolve. Very rarely do people have the time and the appetite to sit back, relax, and really put this stuff in scope. Sort of why Jools and I are here, though. Right, shall we? You talk
it's why we get up in the morning, I think, probably, to help solve these problems, right? But look,
glutton for punishment, because I absolutely love it, but it is the same across every business I see.
It is, and it doesn't really make a difference what size the business is. I think there's a few key points to pick up on there. First off, there's no blame, right? We tend to see in environments that when we look at our workforce, quite robust processes around how companies engage their permanent workforce. They've been doing those things for a really long time. There's usually clear ownership, usually sits under HR, right? Or possibly talent acquisition might be involved in a larger business in terms of bringing the right folks in to get work done. But to Jack's point around how the external workforce has kind of grown up within businesses, and in really large enterprise folks, we tend to sit under procurement, right? External workforce was largely seen as a commodity for many, many, many years. But the world is changing, and the world's really changing because our new generation really wants to work differently. We've seen the rise of nomads, right, who work from anywhere at all in the world. I think there's a commonly quoted stat that most of the Gen Zers don't want to stay in a permanent role for very long, right? They see themselves as doing a couple of years here or there, but growing through that experience. So businesses need to adapt to that new world of work, because they still need to attract the right quality of people to come and work for them and get that work done. So that's why the external workforce has perhaps had a lot more of a spotlight on it, and why it's changed over the years to where it is today. Many of the organisations that we work with, balance is probably 50-50 now, to give you an idea. That's, and actually it's often quite difficult to really know what the balance is, because that control and visibility isn't there. We don't really know. It's not unusual to go into an organisation, ask them if they know what their external workforce looks like today, and pretty much let with blank stares a lot of the time. There is a real issue around a lack of ownership there. It doesn't sit under HR. Perhaps it sits a little bit under procurement. We tend to be very cost-focused in the large organisations. Finance are kind of leaning in a little bit because they're processing those invoices and making sure that external workers can get paid. Legal might have something to do with it, but again, they really tend to focus on the permanent side of things and how employment law is changing there, not so au fait perhaps with extended workforce. So it's a very specialist skill, I would say. At the moment, we're seeing organisations go in one of two directions. One is to build cross-functional governance, so that all of those really important functions around the table and can collectively manage the external workforce. And in the other route is that we're seeing organisations develop brand new functions to help manage these things and start to think about what we call total talent in the industry, which is a horrible term, but it means managing your workforce holistically so you can orchestrate it at that holistic level and get the right mix of different worker types in there. There are probably 3 different risk profiles, and openly, guys, we've got a QR code at the end of the session here. If you scan the QR code, it will take you to a 5-minute little risk assessment that you can do to see which one of the buckets you drop into here. And then you can get a tailored information pack from us, which will give you some guidance around what you should be looking at first. The important thing here, it's not around size or sector, it really is around maturity. So what we tend to see is a lack of maturity around how the external workforce is engaged, lots of ad hoc processes, no centralisation, no tracking really, so no true visibility. And if you're in that bucket, you're probably high risk, because if you can't see it, you can't govern it, essentially. If you don't know what's happening, you can't control it. So that's the companies that really fall into high risk. The other end of the scale, low risk, is those companies that have got good foundations in place. I think openly an opportunity for startup businesses here to be able to get the right foundations in place to be able to grow, particularly companies that have got a very strenuous growth targets, right, and really want to scale quickly. Getting the foundations in place now will enable them to do those things so they don't fall foul at a later stage and then have to retrofit. That can be painful. Medium risk, it's great to see some companies who fall into this who definitely notice there's some problems here. I quite like some standardization. Usually we see it like head of TA or head of HR has started to look at these things, right, more strategically, and has said, right, I can see some stuff working on my permanent side. Can I extend that across external workers to feel like I've got a little bit more insight, a little bit more oversight, a little bit more control? And I think that's a great opportunity, by the way, to look at what you're doing on the permanent side and to try and extend it, if possible, across your external workforce, because you're also building some harmonisation there in terms of processes. But medium risks, likely to have some control in place, maybe some dashboards are being surfaced up, possibly, but that full end-to-end, again, we rarely see that is in place in a robust way. So we'll have things called stranded tasks that drop in, and it's about understanding those stranded tasks. How are they being managed today? If they're not being managed, what risk does that carry, and how can you close those gaps as quickly as possible? Shropshire context. I think probably I'll take this one, but yeah, I think I indicated a little bit earlier. Particularly industries where you're using high volumes of external workers. I know a number of different construction businesses where they've got like 200 employees on the payroll and over 1,000 external workers, right? It really is that sort of dynamic. So we see that a lot in the old blue collar industries, manufacturing, construction, and certainly engineering as well. Here in Shropshire, this is something that we need to be looking at. Those folks definitely need to know what's going on. Probably also, again, looking at some levels of maturity. Construction firms, many of these things operate on the back of Excel spreadsheets, by the way. So again, it's looking at those processes. What do you already know? What capability have you got? And what risk have you got that you need to close, really? But yeah, SMEs working on tight margins. We appreciate that a lot of the time, perhaps it's HR stretched across many different things. So it's understandable that there's blind spots here, and yeah, that's what we're here to do, is to help bring some clarity there and help cover those gaps. Jack, you're on mute. I can see you. I can see your mouth moving.
I was going to add, I've seen a couple of sort of common trends across these types of businesses as well, which is, I think it's what you said of, I do look after HR, but it's not my job. Like, it's not my sole remit. And for organisations that are quite thinly spread, this probably won't be a priority. So I think this awareness piece is really important.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the awareness side, coming back to really, Kelly, you guys and your team over at the Chambers, I see it as a great opportunity, right, for local government to be able to bring these kinds of messages to members in good time. I mean, we are 8 weeks out, to be clear. But the panic button's not there. This just allows us to be able to help be a little bit more proactive rather than reactive. Because once April hits and suddenly people realise that this is a burning platform, and they'll have to move very, very quickly to close those gaps. And that can be really disruptive to the rest of business operations. So we really appreciate the partnership with Chambers to be able to bring this to members in good time.
Yeah, great. So let's sort of pivot a little bit into, I think, starting to think about how you solve this. A good place to start is always to diagnose yourself, I think. And if you're in a really good, competent state, you should be able to answer questions like this with like real confidence. Usually people say, let me go and check, and that's absolutely fine, but it's how long that check takes, I suppose, gauges your maturity. So things like who's working for us through agencies and umbrellas, that's a fundamental part of this. If you don't have visibility and control over that, that automatically almost puts you at quite high risk. Are they paying the right tax and national insurance? Those, sort of go hand in hand, is what we've said about control, visibility, and just understanding how your workforce is set up. So we can give you these questions, we'll keep them in the deck, but all of these actually point towards, I think, that bigger trend that I was talking about at the start. This will help with umbrella reform, but this will also help with everything else that's coming down the pike that's on the horizon around workforce reform. So it's a really great opportunity to start getting yourself organised. And then you get loads of benefits at the back end of it, right, Jules? It's not just about getting yourself compliant. You will find operationally your organisation gets more productive and sort of starts singing in sweet harmony once that foundation is laid. So lots of benefits and perks to it. Common questions, Jules? Do you want to grab that one?
Yeah, I think we've covered some of them already, but do we even have umbrellas in our supply chain? Yeah, to Jack's point, when we ask this, most people say, I don't know, let me go and check. But yeah, most do, if I'm honest, particularly if you're hiring contractors on a regular basis, then many of those folks are going through umbrella companies just for the same reasons that Jack gave earlier around there's huge benefits from a contractor's perspective as well. It's a bit of a win-win. It makes things a little bit easier for everyone around the table. So usually the answer to the question, if you don't know it, is you probably have. To give you an idea of numbers of umbrellas which are often involved, I work with a large business here in the UK, and they were surprised to learn they had 8 umbrellas engaged in bringing contractors in. So there is work to do there to understand whether or not all those umbrellas are behaving compliantly, and to get that visibility, which, from their point of view, they felt they'd outsourced it, but they didn't have any clue actually how many people were actually involved in that chain at all.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jack.
No, I was agreeing with you.
Okay. Isn't this the agency's responsibility? Yeah, we touched on this earlier. Yeah, it's their job to handle the actual compliance, but it's your job to govern that they're doing a good job. So you need to have that visibility anyway. Finance bill has changed. So yes, the direct tax liability is reduced if you've got agencies in the middle, and assuming you're not using offshore companies, then yes, that tax risk or direct liability is lower. But yeah, operational and reputational risk absolutely remain. Operational risk can be a real stinger, right? If you've got a project on the go, the cost of a project stalling, where you've got people on the bench, you've got everyone lined up, you lose momentum, it can have a really big impact on what you're looking to achieve. We're too small to worry about this. I'm a company of 5, I worry about it. Luckily, I'm making sure that I've got the right things in place and that I've got that full visibility and control. But yeah, it's not around your size. It's really around the level of maturity you've got into your processes, really. So you still need to do it. And can't we just deal with this in March? You absolutely can if you want to be scrabbling around. But again, think about the impact on ops there and everything else that you're trying to do with your business. 2 weeks is really panic mode. What we're trying to do here is get ahead of it so that it can be better managed and therefore not as disruptive to your business operations as perhaps it would be closer to that April deadline.
Yeah. We can sort of link this. I think Laura asked a question around the sort of size of penalties. Going back to that, we're too small to worry about this piece. As a sort of really broad rule of thumb, if you equate the risk to about 20% of that person's salary, that starts to give you an idea of how quickly this could amass. So you need one person's bad, 10 people's catastrophic, 100 people's lights out. I think so. It's how much tax is owed, how big the hole is, and then they can charge you penalties and interest if they want to. I suppose it also opens up for a broader investigation. So, Laura, in answer to your question, it starts there. It could get worse, and that's why the scale thing is a bit of a misnomer. I think even a really small agency or business could be horribly exposed really quickly.
It starts to get unmanageable, I think, for around 20 external workers, right? That starts to grow arms and legs at that point of really understanding how those folks are engaged, who they're working for, how they're getting paid, and whether or not you've got visibility into that. So really that's, I mean, it sounds very low level, right? It sounds like it should be completely manageable at 20, but it can quickly get away from you.
Yeah, the stuff that's going through tribunal at the moment, like for the big cases, HMRC have just frozen their assets like immediately because they're immediately saying, okay, well, you're essentially a sort of flight risk for this tax. So to stop you dissolving and just disappearing overnight, we're just going to freeze you, and it can be that severe. Let's move on to timing a little bit. I'd like to speak a little bit about my experience of IR35 as a personal vendetta I have against UK businesses and their preparation for off-payroll worker regs. When IR35 dropped in the private sector, I was working for an organisation. I was deep in the weeds with solving that for businesses as a supplier, and I went through some very long sales cycles trying to persuade people to act now. Cut to the 6th of April 2021, and I was up every night till 3 a.m. for a fortnight trying to get companies compliant. Big, famous, like big brand enterprise customers with well-funded HR teams, all very smart. Everyone knows what they're doing. They just didn't act in time. And the reason I have a personal vendetta is that because it impacted me deeply and personally during that time. It was really frustrating because we kept saying to organizations, act now, get ahead, and then sort of stick the landing on the 6th. There should be no action that week. There should be nothing that needs to happen. It's all pre-planned. And what we're saying to businesses around this umbrella reform stuff is just do the work now, start now, stick the landing, get it all set up before the deadline. Because strict liability means that from the 6th, the clock is ticking, and every mistake you make or your supply chain makes is locked in. There is no reasonable care. There is no defense after that. So you have to be in a really solid position on the day, not after the day. There's a lot of similar trends between how IR35 is handled by businesses and how they're handling this. A real wait and see approach, but I would say the liability is different and the way it will affect businesses is different. And to some extent,
Grace period, isn't there? There's no grace period as there was with IR35. There was a bit of a grace period with IR35 where the penalties didn't kick in, right? There was a little bit of space there. I had probably the opposite experience of IR35, which was working with large enterprises who literally put blanket bans on bringing contractors in. And the impact that has on business ops is significant. And there's no, I mean, it's largely been proved now that it was a crazy move to make, right? But again, it comes from having to behave and reactively. If you can get ahead of these things and got time to prepare, you can make sensible decisions, really.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the blanket bans, we had several clients at the time that went for that as well. And it was reacting sort of in a vacuum and saying, okay, well, this is a risk, so that's the solve for it. But they didn't consult cross-functionally, and what it led to was legal teams saying you need to do this, and then the biz ops fall over because actually you need those workers and they're core to your capabilities. So next steps, Jools and I put together something of a sort of little process for you to add as much value as possible. The next slide is a QR code. I'll ask you to scan that. It will take you to the Freeflexer website. There's a sort of hidden page on there that Jools and I have set up, which runs the assessment. So just click on the self-assessment button. It'll take you through the little form. If you are uncomfortable filling out a form digitally and would prefer a paper one, we can email you or post it to you. or Jules will drop it over when she's got some free time. But essentially, it's a risk assessment to just gauge right off the bat where you sit in those three different columns of risk that we outlined earlier. And then off the back of that assessment, we'll send you an information pack and a tailored insert around actions. As we've said from the outset, this is about not just explaining what the problem is, but helping you guys solve it wherever possible.
Question has popped up, Jack.
Okie dokes. Do you think that businesses will have learned from IR35, or do you think the blanket bans will result? One of my favourite things to come out of IR35, Laura, was loads of organisations said, right, no more limited company freelancers. We're going to put them all on umbrellas. And then here we are. So what I think some businesses will do is, again, just try and solve this one specific problem, which is why I keep talking about this greater trend around where the workforce is going and where regulation and legislation is directing us. If you keep trying to solve individual challenges and problems, you'll end up playing whack-a-mole with HMRC. I believe that you'll keep getting challenges crop up, because unless you change your approach, you're going to constantly find yourself butting up against this type of legislation. I'd like to think some of them have learned something from it. I feel perhaps the worst thing they've learned from it is that HMRC have been really slow to prosecute, so they feel like this isn't a risk. But actually what we're seeing now is HMRC going back in time with their newly sort of kitted up investigations team and starting that process back from 2021. So I think there's a false sense of security here about how impactful this stuff is. So I hope that's not the learning that they took from it, but my suspicion is it might be.
Probably also worth mentioning here, we're talking here about the broader direction of travel, right? We need something robust ongoing, not a one-off fix for this particular legislation. And it might be a little bit of a misnomer, if that's the right phrase, that these things are really expensive to do, and they don't have to be. There's definitely some criticism out there of the large consultancies, right, overcomplicating, over-engineering some of these solutions. And actually getting the nuts and bolts in place just to understand a little bit about your current state and where you are is becoming easier for businesses. Technology openly is the driver there for change and the enabler, but technology is certainly enabling folks like Jack and I to be able to go in and with a very, very lean approach. In fact, that's one of our philosophies is to take an extremely lean approach, really, and just get the basics in place and then to try and grow from there. So you don't have to walk away thinking this is going to be really expensive. There are different ways of going around it, I think, to fit the needs of every business and every pocket, really.
Yeah, agreed. Let's scan the QR code if you have a moment. I'd love you to. Kelly, I'm particularly looking at you. And then once you've done that, give me a little wave or a signal, maybe. This will be the most traffic my website's ever had. I'm excited. Okay. I think it's worth us saying something nice about our lovely chamber partnership, don't you, Jules?
Yeah, I do. I'm a little bit biased because I am a Shropshire-based business. I live literally just down from the Wrekin, have a lovely view of our beautiful Wrekin from my window here. But look, not every chamber will be this proactive and have this duty of care towards their members. So I want to say a big thank you to Shropshire Chambers for all of the partnership, really, in trying to bring this to members and make sure that businesses do know about the change that's coming. We'll find a way of getting this recording to you guys and so it can be distributed further. The more businesses that we can reach, the better. This is really about education and making sure that everyone has got time to prepare. I would love to get to the end of this year knowing that we've managed to get Shropshire businesses to where they need to be. That would be, for me, very, very personally rewarding for the fact that I'm based here selfishly. But yes, thanks very much, Kelly, for you and your team and all the efforts you put in. Big thank you from Jack and I.
Yeah. Fantastic. So we can move to Q&A, and we've got a little wrap-up slide, but that is sort of concludes the journey from what was the phrase, emotional wreck to hopefully well-informed. It'd be interesting to hear if we've converted any of you, or if there's any other outstanding questions. I think we've mostly nobbled things as they came in. Orion, yeah, sorry, talent acquisition, TA. That's my industry lingo creeping in, poor form.
I think from a chamber perspective,
Yeah,
myself information, it makes me think there's so many of our members that don't still know about this.
yeah,
That we get the message across, and I think Jools Barrow-Read conversations, it's all about profile raising and letting people know to use the expert to hear that it is coming. So definitely we can have further conversations about how we can make our members and get this message out. One of
yeah.
the definite elements is construction and manufacturing, which I think a lot of them might be called risks and something not to spread the word about.
Yeah, yeah. I think visibility has been really poor on this, and it's not business's fault. And we're trying to do our best, but I think the government's actually been really poor on making the impacts clear of this. They've really, the message they've been saying is very much this is going to impact recruitment and staffing agencies, and it's just not the case. It's going to impact everybody. They're looking at it strictly from a tax liability perspective, and they're not thinking about the greater impact of what could happen if suppliers fail. And that's what we're going to be seeing. So it is really important. It's nobody's fault except the government's, because they haven't done the sort of marketing piece behind this legislation launch. Everyone's diverted their attention onto the Employment Rights Act and Fair Work Agency and so on. But to me, there's a real fundamental piece of work that needs to happen here.
Well, fair to say also, and you mentioned it at the beginning of the session, Jack, that we're running this HR in Focus event. That's on the 24th of Feb. I think you can sign up via the Chamber's website. Is that members only, Kelly, or is that open to non-members?
Members and non-members. It's
Right.
an event from 9:30 for a couple of hours over in Telford. So please do take a look on the website and you're welcome to sign up.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, that's a really great. I mean, the reality is here, guys, that because one of the reasons that no one's reacting to it is because of that. It's not my job, right? Someone always figures out someone else is probably managing this, and the reality it's not. Where we normally see this landing is HR. Unfortunately, they already have so many stresses and strains already, many different things that they're responsible for. That's why the reasons we are running the HR in Focus session on the 24th of Feb to not just look at umbrella reforms, but also the broader landscape for HR and what the expectation is of them, really. But where this fits, this external workforce bit fits within that broader picture, I think would be really interesting. So the other point I want to make, probably pertinent at the end of here, is that if this video goes out to anyone who is in a recruitment business in Shropshire, you would have heard throughout this that your risk here is higher because you are in that liability seat. You're actually responsible for making sure that the umbrellas that you're working with are doing the right job. So it's probably a slightly different message. And hey, look, we are available to have one-to-one calls with any recruitment business as well to help you navigate this. Jack and I are always at the other end of the phone, to be honest. So if you are in that seat wondering what this means to you, but heard quite all the way through that, don't worry, it's as the end client, it's the recruitment business, and now you're thinking, oh my Lord, what does this mean for me? Then we're certainly available to have a chat with you about it and can help give a little bit of a steer and navigate and things like that. So
yeah, good point. So I'll just wrap up real quick. The key takeaways, I think the risk has evolved, as Jools sort of outlaid. I think originally there was a firmer tax liability issue, but what we're seeing now is it's not just about that financial liability. We've got to look at it operationally and reputationally as well. Like those are going to have a real impact on businesses across the region. Without visibility, what does Jools always say? You can't manage what you can't see. So visibility is everything, and doing this project or sort of getting that visibility now is going to help you in the future across a number of streams for emerging regulation legislation. 8 weeks is enough. 6 weeks is fine. 4 weeks is a bit squeaky. Under that, like I do start to think that you're inflicting risk on your business. So I would personally start to think about acting now. Please do jump on that assessment, and you'll receive the info pack off the back of that. Jools and I have a shared vision around this stuff, about this being an opportunity. Change can be scary, but change usually opens the door on loads of exciting things. And embracing a blended, flexible, extended workforce with loads of brilliant new types of workers, I think is a really exciting opportunity for your business. And it unlocks all sorts of capabilities and innovation you might not think you can afford or acquire. So do grab it. And then, yeah, you have our details. The last slide is a sort of contact slide. So you have our details, do the assessment, get the inserts, get the info pack, and then we can take a conversation from there. Jools and I, as she said, are really happy to jump on and give you an hour of our time to sort of do some light discovery or test your readiness for this stuff. So with that, I will say thank you. Those are our details. Please share, like, subscribe, come to the next one, come to the HR forum, definitely. Jools, you've launched the poll and we've converted.
I have launched it, and I'm pleased to say that we don't have any emotional wrecks anymore, which is great. I've got a couple there and very confident, which is really great news. Yeah, it's and I think done a great job, Jack, actually, particularly on making this an exciting topic and not quite so dry. So thank you very much to you for being my co-host as well.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Jools. Thank you. I can't help it. I just love it. I just love umbrella reform. And when you 40 days of continuous rain, you need a good umbrella.
Indeed, good point. Certainly here in Shropshire, I can tell you we know what wet weather is like being this close to Wales. Lovely. Thanks, guys, so much for your help. It's been brilliant, and we'll see you soon, hopefully at the HR in Focus session on the 24th of Feb.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.